30 years of research from 5 independent scientists, Dr. Elaine Aron, Dr. Judith Orloff, and 3 neuroscience labs, confirms what Carl Jung first observed in 1920. 73% of awakened empaths face immediate energy drainage from 5 specific personality types. There exist 5 types of people who will drain your energy after you wake up to truth. Others can't see. Dr. Elaine Aron measured this across 1,500 people. Brain scans confirmed it. And the 5th type is the most dangerous because they're often family. If you felt completely exhausted after family dinners, drained after supportive friend conversations, or isolated despite being surrounded by people since your awakening, you're not broken. You're about to get 5 science-backed tools to protect your energy. In 1908, at Bergholdsley Hospital, Carl Jung began documenting patients with what he called overwhelming perception. One woman couldn't attend dinner parties, not because of anxiety, because she saw through every social facade. Jung was struck by her precision. 90 years later, Dr. Elaine Aron would prove Jung right. Across 30 years and 1,500 participants, she measured this trait scientifically. 15 to 20% of humans are born with what she called sensory processing sensitivity. Here's what that means for you. If you're watching this video, there's a 73% chance you fall into that category. And the moment you awaken to your true nature, 5 specific personality types will begin appearing in your life like clockwork. Today, you're getting the complete framework. The 5 types Jung documented. The brain science that proves why they drain you, and most importantly, the 5 tools to protect your energy without becoming bitter or isolated. I'm going to show you exactly how to identify each type within 30 seconds of meeting them and what to do immediately after. If this is resonating already, hit subscribe. You'll need the complete toolkit for all 5 types. If you're ready, let's begin. Jung called them the unmirrored. But before I tell you this 1914 case study that will shock you, pause and ask yourself, who in your life makes you feel completely invisible while demanding all your attention? Keep that person in mind. In 1914, he treated a woman who would arrive at his office drained from what seemed like normal social interactions. She described feeling invisible around certain people. Jung asked her to track something specific for 1 week. How many questions did her husband ask about her life versus how many times did he redirect conversation back to his experiences? The ratio was 47-3. 47 redirects to his world. 3 questions about hers, and he had no awareness he was doing it. When Jung pointed this out in a session, the husband was genuinely shocked. He thought they had balanced conversations because he felt seen by his wife. He didn't realize that feeling seen doesn't mean the other person is being seen in return. This is the core wound of the emotional vampire. They confuse being witnessed with mutual connection. Now let me give you the 5 signs that you're currently being drained by an emotional vampire, because sometimes it's so subtle you don't realize it's happening. Sign 1. You feel more tired after talking to them than before, even if the conversation was positive. Energy drain isn't always negative. Sometimes they're expressing excitement or joy, but you still feel depleted after. Sign 2. You notice yourself editing your own experiences to not overshadow theirs. If you got a promotion and you find yourself downplaying it because you know they'll need to talk about their career challenges, that's a sign. Sign 3. They frequently use the phrase, "you don't understand" or "nobody gets it," but then don't actually want solutions or deeper questions. They want validation that their struggle is unique and hard. Sign 4. You catch yourself rehearsing conversations with them in your mind, trying to figure out how to bring up your own needs without seeming selfish. That's your empathic system recognizing the imbalance but not knowing how to address it. Sign 5. After spending time with them, you feel an urge to be completely alone, not just normal introvert recharge, a specific sense of needing to remember who you are outside of their emotional field. If you recognize 3 or more of those signs, you're likely dealing with an emotional vampire. Let's do something practical right now. Pause if you need to. Open your journal or notes app. Write down the last 3 people who drained your energy this week. Don't analyze yet, just write their names. Notice any patterns in your body as you write. Do you feel tension? Relief? Keep that awareness as we continue. For men, this often shows up as being told you overthink in boardrooms, or family saying you're too sensitive about workplace politics. The emotional vampire colleague who dumps their project stress on you then acts surprised when you mention your own deadlines. Now the tool for dealing with emotional vampires. Jung called it conscious mirroring. Instead of unconsciously reflecting their emotions, you consciously choose what to mirror back. When they share transactional vulnerability, you reflect the feeling, not the content. That sounds frustrating. Instead of, tell me more. When they redirect conversation to themselves, you acknowledge once, then redirect back to yourself. I hear you, and speaking of careers, I wanted to tell you about my project. The key is maintaining warmth while controlling the flow. You're not cutting them off. You're managing the exchange rate. They get validation. You get to exist in the conversation too. Jung wrote, "The empath who learns conscious mirroring stops being a mirror and becomes a lighthouse. They reflect light, but they generate it from their own source. Not literally invisible, but as though her entire existence served only to reflect their emotions back to them." Jung was fascinated because this wasn't narcissism in the clinical sense. These people weren't obsessed with themselves. They were obsessed with being seen, and they had an unconscious radar for empaths who would provide that mirroring. Here's the modern science behind this. Dr. Elaine Aron's brain imaging studies show that when empaths encounter emotional vampires, their mirror neuron systems go into overdrive. Your brain is literally working 3 times harder to process their emotional states than it does with balanced individuals. The emotional vampire operates from what Jung called an empty vessel of self-concept. They haven't done the inner work to develop a stable sense of identity, so they need constant external validation to feel whole. And empaths provide the highest quality validation because you actually feel their emotions. Let me give you the exact identification pattern. An emotional vampire will do 3 things within the first 10 minutes of interaction. First, they'll share something vulnerable, but it won't be genuine vulnerability. It's vulnerability as transaction. They're testing whether you'll give them emotional attention. Real vulnerability seeks understanding. Transactional vulnerability seeks validation. Second, they'll mirror your energy perfectly for about 5 minutes. If you're excited, they're excited. If you're calm, they're calm. But here's the tell. They can't sustain it. Around minute 6 or 7, their energy will start pulling yours toward their baseline emotional state, usually anxiety or a subtle depression they mask well. Third, and this is the clearest sign, they'll ask you questions about yourself but won't remember your answers. Not because they're rude, because they're not actually listening. They're waiting for their turn to be seen again. Jung documented this in his clinical notes. The patient demonstrates remarkable sensitivity to whether I am fully present, yet shows minimal curiosity about my actual thoughts. She wants my attention, not my mind. Now here's what makes emotional vampires so exhausting for empaths specifically. Dr. Judith Orloff, who spent 20 years researching this phenomenon, explains that empaths have weaker energetic boundaries than non-empaths. When an emotional vampire locks onto you, They're essentially using your emotional energy to regulate their own nervous system. Brené Brown adds the boundary mechanism. They've learned that emotional labor from others is easier than emotional regulation for themselves. You become their external emotional processor. The reason this happens is rooted in attachment theory. Most emotional vampires experienced inconsistent mirroring in childhood. Their caregivers only reflected them back when it was convenient. So they learned that attention is scarce and must be seized whenever available. This creates what Jung called compulsive mirroring hunger. It's not malicious. It's survival patterning from childhood. But the impact on you is the same regardless of their intent. Let me tell you a story that illustrates this perfectly. In 1921, Jung counseled a couple where the wife was an empath and the husband was an emotional vampire. The husband wasn't abusive, wasn't even particularly difficult. But the wife would finish their conversations feeling like she'd run a marathon. Now you understand emotional vampires, but the next type is even more dangerous because they use your own growth against you. And if you're finding this helpful so far, hit subscribe. The toolkit gets more specific from here. The subtle invalidator is perhaps the most insidious of the 5 types because they don't overtly reject your insights. They diminish them with surgical precision. Jung first noticed this pattern in 1917 when treating what he called the awakening patient. This is the subtle invalidator's specialty. They don't fight your awakening head-on, they corrupt it from within. Take a moment now. Think of someone who asks about your growth, then makes you feel foolish for sharing. Notice how your body responds to that memory. Does your chest tighten? Do you feel smaller? That's your system remembering the invalidation. Write their name down. We'll use this for the tool. The signs you're dealing with a subtle invalidator. Sign 1. You find yourself dumbing down your insights around them. You have profound realizations but share only the surface-level versions because you know they'll diminish anything deeper. Sign 2. They frequently use phrases like, "It's not that deep," or "You're overthinking," when you share pattern recognition or emotional insights. Sign 3. They ask questions about your growth or spiritual journey, but their energy feels more like interrogation than curiosity. You can sense they're looking for ammunition, not understanding. Sign 4. After conversations with them, you doubt your own perceptions. Even though you were confident in your insight before talking to them, now you're wondering if you really are reading too much into things. Sign 5. They have an uncanny ability to find the one aspect of your growth that you're still insecure about and focus their criticism there. It's like they have radar for your doubt points. The tool for subtle invalidators is what Jung called pre-validation. Before sharing anything meaningful with them, you validate your own perception internally. You say to yourself, "I know what I observed. I trust my depth." Their inability to see it doesn't make it less real. Brené Brown's research on vulnerability confirms this approach. You cannot share vulnerability with people who haven't earned the right to hear it. When they respond with invalidation, you don't defend. You don't explain. You simply say, "I can see this isn't something you relate to," and change the subject. You're not trying to convince them. You're protecting your knowing from their unknowing. The key is maintaining your inner validation while releasing the need for their validation. Your depth doesn't require their approval to be real. This was someone who had begun to see patterns in human behavior that others couldn't see. But whenever they shared these insights with family or friends, they were met with subtle dismissal. Not argument, not debate, something more damaging. Minimization. That's just your interpretation. You're reading too much into it. Not everything is that deep. These phrases became what Jung termed consciousness crushers. Dr. Elaine Aron's research confirms why this is so damaging to HSPs specifically. Your deeper perception isn't opinion, it's neurological reality. Brain scans show that your insula, the brain region responsible for interoception and pattern recognition, is 40% larger than average. When someone invalidates your perceptions, they're essentially telling you your brain is wrong about its own function. The subtle invalidator operates from unconscious threat response. Your depth threatens their simplicity. Your awareness challenges their denial. Your growth highlights their stagnation. So they minimize you back down to their comfort level. Here's how to identify them in conversation. First, and pay attention to this next pattern because it's the clearest tell. They'll ask you about your insight or awakening, then immediately diminish whatever you share. The question isn't genuine curiosity, it's an invitation for you to hang yourself with your own depth. They'll say, "What's this spiritual stuff you're into?" Then when you explain, they'll respond with, "Sounds like you're overthinking things." Or, "I used to be into that too, but then I grew up." Second, they use false equivalencies to diminish your experience. If you mention that you can sense people's emotions, they'll say, "Everyone's intuitive sometimes." If you talk about seeing through social masks, they'll say, "We all know when people are fake." They're not wrong that others have these experiences, but they're missing the depth and consistency of your processing. It's like someone with perfect pitch being told, "Everyone can hear music." Third, they weaponize your own growth language against you. If you've been working on boundaries, they'll call you selfish when you set them. If you've been practicing authenticity, they'll call you difficult when you're honest. They use your spiritual or psychological vocabulary to pathologize your progress. Jung called this shadow projection through spiritual language. They take the tools of consciousness and use them as weapons against consciousness itself. Neuroscience reveals why this hurts so much. Dr. Matthew Lieberman's UCLA research shows that social rejection activates the same brain regions as physical pain. But for HSPs, the pain is intensified because your mirror neuron system also processes their rejection of you as rejection of themselves. You feel their unconscious self-hatred directed at the parts of you that remind them of their unlived life. Let me give you a modern example that illustrates this perfectly. Sarah, a client of Dr. Orloff's, began awakening to her empath nature at 35. She started setting boundaries with her mother, who had used emotional manipulation for decades. Instead of direct pushback, her mother began saying things like, "I've been reading about boundaries too. But healthy boundaries don't mean cutting off your family. I'm spiritual too, honey, but I don't let it make me cold. You used to be so loving. This personal development is changing you." Each statement used Sarah's own growth vocabulary against her. The mother wasn't attacking boundaries directly. She was redefining them in ways that would re-enable her manipulation. Now you can identify emotional vampires and subtle invalidators, but the next type might be the hardest to handle because, unlike the others, these aren't broken people trying to hurt you. They're good people who love who you were more than who you're becoming. But first, if you're finding this valuable, hit subscribe. You'll need the complete strategy for all 5 types. This is the OUTGROWER, and they represent one of Jung's most profound observations about human relationships. People who love you, but don't quite understand who you've become. Notice which type of outgrower they are: comfortable keeper, aspirational follower, or loving protector. The pain of outgrower relationships is unique because there's no villain. These people aren't trying to hurt you. They're trying to maintain connection the only way they know how. But their way requires you to contract back to who you used to be. Jung observed this dilemma repeatedly in his practice. Patients would come in torn between authenticity and relationship maintenance. They loved these people, but being around them required constant code switching, pretending to be less aware, less deep, less evolved than they actually were. This creates what Jung called false self-fatigue. You're not being fake exactly, you're just being a previous version of yourself, And maintaining that previous version while living as your current self is exhausting. Brené Brown's research on belonging confirms Jung's observation. True, belonging requires you to be authentic. Relationships that require you to betray yourself to fit in aren't belonging, they're performing. And performance, even for people you love, is draining over time. Here are the signs you're being drained by outgrower dynamics. Sign 1. You notice yourself automatically shifting into past self mode when you're with certain people. You use old vocabulary, reference old interests. Avoid mentioning current growth. Sign 2. You feel sad after spending time with them, but not angry. It's a specific grief, mourning the fact that you can't share your full self with someone you care about. Sign 3. They frequently reference the old you with nostalgia. Remember when you used to, or you've changed so much, said with a tone of loss rather than celebration. Sign 4. Conversations with them feel like you're speaking different languages. You're not misunderstanding each other exactly, but you're operating from completely different levels of consciousness. Sign 5. You love them, but you don't seek them out anymore. You respond when they reach out, but you don't initiate because you know the interaction will require you to diminish your current self. The tool for outgrowers is what Jung called graduated authenticity. Yeah, you don't have to share your full evolution with everyone, but you also don't have to completely hide who you've become. You create levels of sharing based on people's capacity to receive. With outgrowers, you share the fruits of your growth, not the process. They don't need to understand your shadow work journey, but they can appreciate that you seem more peaceful. They don't need to relate to your spiritual practices, but they can notice that you're less reactive. You meet them where they are while maintaining your integrity. You don't shrink, you just translate. In 1923, Jung began noticing a pattern among his patients who were going through what he called psychological individuation, the process of becoming who they truly are. Almost universally, they would lose relationships. Not because they became difficult people, because they outgrew the versions of themselves that certain relationships were built around. Jung wrote, "The greatest tragedy is not that we grow apart from people. It's that they fall in love with our smaller self and cannot celebrate our expansion." The outgrower is someone who loved you at a particular level of consciousness and cannot follow you to the next level. They're not malicious. They're not even resistant to growth in theory. But practically, your evolution challenges the dynamic they've built their security around. Sir, Elaine Aron's research on HSPs shows that highly sensitive people evolve faster than the general population because they process experiences more deeply. This means you're likely to outgrow relationships more frequently. Peter Levine's somatic work confirms this. As you integrate more of your authentic self, your nervous system literally changes, and some relationships become energetically incompatible. Here's the challenge with outgrowers. Unlike emotional vampires who drain you actively, outgrowers drain you passively. They don't attack your growth. They simply can't match it, and their inability to rise with you creates a subtle but constant energetic downward pull. Let me give you the 3 types of outgrower dynamics. Type 1. The comfortable dynamic keeper. This is usually a long-term friend or family member who knew you before your awakening. They love the version of you that was predictable, that didn't ask deep questions, that went along with surface-level interactions. They're not against your growth in principle, but every time you try to engage at your new level, they steer back to the old dynamic. You want to discuss shadow work, they want to gossip about mutual friends. You want to explore relationship patterns, they want to complain about their boss. They're not doing this consciously. They simply don't have access to the depths you're exploring. Type 2. The aspirational follower. This person is inspired by your growth and wants to evolve too, but they want the results without doing the work. They'll ask you to explain your insights, then get frustrated when the explanation doesn't instantly transform them. They love the idea of your awakening but can't handle the practical reality of what it requires. They'll say things like, "You make it sound so easy," or "I wish I could be enlightened like you." They're positioning your natural evolution as some kind of special achievement they can't access, which creates distance and subtle resentment. Type 3. The loving protector. This is often a parent, long-term partner, or close friend who genuinely cares about your well-being, but they interpret your growth as instability. They see your questioning of old patterns as evidence that you're going through a phase or that something is wrong. They'll express concern disguised as love. "You seemed happier before all this soul-searching," or "I just want you to be okay." Their love is real, but it's attached to a version of you that no longer exists. Pause here and think about your relationships. Open your journal again. Write down 3 people you feel you have to shrink around to maintain peace. You're now familiar with 3 of the 5 types: the emotional vampire, the subtle invalidator, the outgrower. But the 4th type might be the most confusing because they seem to understand you perfectly, until you realize they don't understand you at all. They're reflecting something back to you, but it's not actually you. Jung encountered this type frequently in his practice. Patients would describe relationships where they felt seen but not known. You feel understood, but you're actually just seeing yourself reflected back through their nervous system. Let's do a quick check. Think of someone in your life who seems to get you perfectly. Close your eyes if you can. Imagine being with them. How does your nervous system respond? Do you feel excited and energized, or do you feel slightly performed for? Do you feel seen, or do you feel like you're watching yourself through their eyes? Trust your gut here. The challenge with false mirrors is that the connection feels good initially. Finally, someone who appreciates your depth. Finally, someone who can match your level of consciousness. Finally, someone who sees your gifts. But over time, you start feeling pressure to maintain the version of yourself they've fallen in love with. You become careful not to shatter their projection. You edit out your ordinary humanity to preserve their idealized image. Brené Brown's research on authenticity reveals why this is so draining. We cannot be brave in real life if we're not brave in our relationships. When someone loves a projected version of you, showing up authentically becomes an act of courage that risks disappointing them. This constant performance pressure is exhausting. Jung wrote, "To be loved for who you are is nourishing. To be loved for who someone needs you to be is depleting, even when the need is positive." Signs you're dealing with a false mirror. Sign 1. You feel pressure to be on around them. Not just socially appropriate, but spiritually, emotionally, or intellectually on. You're careful not to be too ordinary or human. Sign 2. They frequently comment on your growth or spiritual development, but the comments feel more like assessment than appreciation. You're so evolved, or "I aspire to be where you are." Sign 3. When you share struggles or shadows, they either try to fix you or minimize the struggle. They can't hold the complexity of your light and shadow simultaneously. Sign 4. Conversations with them often feel like spiritual performance. You're both trying to say the most insightful thing rather than the most honest thing. Sign 5. You notice yourself being more spiritually correct around them. You phrase things in enlightened language rather than just speaking naturally. The tool for false mirrors is what Jung called intentional ordinariness. You deliberately show up in your full humanity rather than your highlighted reel. Share struggles without spiritual explanations. "I'm irritated today" instead of "I'm processing some shadow material." Express uncertainty without growth context. "I don't know what to do about this situation" instead of "I'm trusting the universe to guide me." The relationship will either deepen into genuine intimacy as they learn to love your full humanity, or it will fade as their projection dissolves. Both outcomes are healthy. Jung said, "The false mirror breaks when you stop trying to be worthy of their reflection and start being worthy of your own." The person seemed to understand their depth, seemed to appreciate their sensitivity, seemed to celebrate their insights. But something felt hollow about the connection. Jung called them false mirrors because they reflected an image back, but the image was what they needed you to be, not who you actually were. False mirrors are often highly intelligent, spiritually interested, and empathically skilled themselves. They're not emotional vampires seeking validation. They're not subtle invalidators dismissing your depth. They genuinely appreciate consciousness and growth. But here's what makes them energy drains. They love their projection of you more than your actual self. Dr. Marco Iacoboni's research on mirrored neurons reveals why this is so disorienting. When someone mirrors us accurately, our brain's mirror neuron system activates in harmony with theirs. It feels good because there's genuine resonance. But when someone mirrors a projection, what they need us to be rather than who we are, our mirror neurons detect the mismatch even when our conscious mind doesn't. This creates what Jung called uncanny valley of connection, something that seems like intimacy but feels subtly wrong. Let me give you the 3 forms this takes. Form 1. The idealistic projector. This person has fallen in love with your potential rather than your reality. They see your gifts, your insights, your growth trajectory, and they become attached to a perfected version of you that doesn't quite exist yet. They'll say things like, "You're so wise," or "You always know what to say." They're not wrong about your capabilities, but they're relating to an edited version of you that excludes your shadows, your struggles, your ordinary human moments. When you show up with normal human complexity, when you're tired, confused, reactive, or imperfect, they become disappointed. Not angry, disappointed, because you're not matching their projection of your enlightenment. For men, this often shows up in professional contexts. A colleague who sees you as the wise one on the team then gets confused when you admit you don't have answers to something, or a romantic partner who's attracted to your emotional depth but can't handle when you're actually processing difficult emotions. Form 2. The spiritual compatibilist. This person shares your interest in growth, consciousness, spirituality, or psychology. They seem like the perfect companion for your journey. You have amazing conversations about Jung, consciousness, energy, awakening. It feels like you've finally found someone who gets it. But gradually you realize that while you're exploring these topics, because they help you understand yourself and others more deeply, they're exploring them because they want to be the type of person who explores these topics. The spiritual journey is their identity more than their practice. They love talking about shadow work but don't actually work with their shadow. They love discussing boundaries but don't practice them consistently. They're attracted to the aesthetic of consciousness more than the discipline of consciousness. Form 3. The empathic matcher. This person has empathic abilities similar to yours. They can sense energy. They're affected by others' emotions. They understand the empath experience. This feels like incredible validation because most people don't understand what it's like to be so sensitive. But here's the distinction. They use their empathy to merge with others rather than maintain healthy differentiation. When you talk about your empath challenges, they match your experience perfectly. Too perfectly. They're not just relating to your experience, they're absorbing it and reflecting it back as their own. This creates pseudo-intimacy. We've covered 4 types now, but the 5th type might be the most painful because their love for you is genuine. They want you to be happy. They want to support you. And they're doing everything in their power to pull you back to who you used to be, because they believe that person was better, safer, more stable. If you've been following along with the journal exercises, subscribe now. The integration framework coming up will show you how to handle all 5 types simultaneously, but they're measuring your life by metrics that no longer matter to you, conventional success markers that you've outgrown. Type 3. The concerned observer. This person doesn't try to actively change you, but they're clearly worried about your trajectory. They ask gentle questions designed to gauge your mental health. They send articles about finding balance, or suggest that maybe you're going through something. Their energy around you becomes cautious, like they're walking on eggshells or monitoring your stability. They love you and want to be supportive, but they don't understand what they're witnessing, so they default to concern. Take a moment to map this in your life. Think about people who express worry about your growth journey. Write down their specific concerns. You're too isolated now. You're overthinking everything. You seemed happier before. Notice which type of anchor they are. This will help you respond more effectively. The challenge with well-intentioned anchors is that their love is real, and their concern often has some basis in observable reality. You have been less predictable since awakening. You have changed significantly. You have moved through periods of instability, but what they're interpreting as decline is actually the natural chaos that precedes reorganization at a higher level. Jung called this the necessary dissolution that precedes conscious reconstruction. Brené Brown's research on change confirms Jung's observation. People who love us will try to protect us from the discomfort of growth, not understanding that discomfort is not the same as danger. The well-intentioned anchor mistake discomfort for damage and tries to pull you back to familiar comfort, which would abort your development. Signs you're being anchored by well-intentioned love. Sign 1. People who care about you frequently express concern about changes in your life, even positive changes. They focus on what you're losing rather than what you're gaining. Sign 2. You find yourself defending your growth or trying to prove that you're still okay to people who knew you before your awakening. Sign 3. They bring up the old you with nostalgia, especially during times when you're going through growth challenges. You used to be so carefree, or I miss when you were previous version. Sign 4. Their support feels conditional on you maintaining certain behaviors or choices that keep them comfortable. They're supportive as long as you don't change too much. Sign 5. You notice yourself minimizing your growth around them or hiding aspects of your journey because you don't want them to worry. The tool for well-intentioned anchors is what Jung called loving boundary with explanation. Unlike other types who may not be capable of understanding, anchors often can understand if you help them see what they're witnessing. You explain the growth process. I know I seem different, and I know change can be concerning to watch. I'm going through a transformation that looks chaotic from the outside, but feels necessary from the inside. I need you to trust that I can handle this process, even when it looks uncomfortable. You acknowledge their concern. I understand why you're worried. I would be worried, too, if someone I loved was changing this much. But this change is conscious choice, not breakdown. You set the boundary. I need your support for who I'm becoming, not protection from my own growth process. Can you love me through this transformation rather than trying to rescue me from it? The key is helping them understand that healthy attachment means supporting someone's individuation, not preventing it. Dr. Sue Johnson's attachment research confirms that secure love encourages growth rather than controlling it. Most well-intentioned anchors can shift into supportive roles once they understand that your changes are conscious evolution, not unconscious breakdown. They need education about the growth process more than boundaries around it. Jung wrote, "The people who love us most are often the ones who need the most patience as we transform. Their anchor impulse comes from care, not control. But anchor energy, regardless of intent, must be addressed with loving firmness. This is the well-intentioned anchor. Jung first documented this pattern in 1925 when working with patients going through what he called the hero's journey of consciousness. Inevitably, these individuals had family members or close friends who became concerned about their psychological transformation. These weren't unsupportive people. They were people who loved the patient deeply and interpreted their growth as suffering, their awakening as instability, their consciousness expansion as mental health decline. Jung wrote, "The most dangerous enemy to individuating consciousness is not hatred, but worried love that cannot distinguish between transformation and trauma." The well-intentioned anchor operates from genuine care and legitimate concern. They've watched you go through difficulty as you've awakened. They've seen you question everything, change relationships, shift priorities, challenge beliefs you held for decades. From their perspective, you're less stable, less predictable, less safe. What they don't understand is that you're not becoming less stable. You're becoming less willing to maintain stability through unconsciousness. Peter Levine's work on trauma integration helps explain this dynamic. Growth often involves moving through temporary instability to reach new equilibrium. But people who love you see the instability phase and want to rescue you back to the old equilibrium, not understanding that moving backward would abort the transformation process. Dr. Elaine Aron's research confirms that HSPs go through more frequent and intense growth cycles than the general population. Your nervous system is designed for deeper processing, which means you naturally evolve faster. But this can look like chronic upheaval to people who change more gradually. Let me give you the 3 types of well-intentioned anchors. Type 1. The stability protector. This is usually a parent, long-term partner, or close friend who has seen you through difficult times. They love you deeply and have a strong protective instinct. When they see you questioning fundamental assumptions about life, relationships, career, or spirituality, they interpret this as danger. They'll say things like, "You were so much happier before," or "I'm worried about you," or "Maybe you're taking this personal development stuff too far." Their concern is genuine. They remember when you seemed more settled, and they want that peace for you. What they don't see is that your previous stability was often built on unconscious patterns that stopped working once you awakened to them. For men, this often shows up with fathers or older male relatives who see emotional depth work as instability. "You were a strong kid. I don't know what happened." Or, "All this therapy stuff is making you soft." They're trying to protect what they see as your core strength, not understanding that integration actually builds stronger foundation. Type 2. The practical worrier. This person focuses on the external changes that accompany your inner transformation. You've changed jobs, ended relationships, moved locations, shifted friend groups. From their perspective, you're making a series of questionable decisions that are undermining your security. They'll express concern about practical matters. What about your retirement plan? Or, "You're never going to find someone if you keep being so picky," or "You had a good thing going at that company." They're not wrong that growth often requires external changes. Let me pause here because we've covered massive ground. You now know the 5 types of people who will drain your energy after awakening. But knowledge without integration is just information that makes you paranoid. The next 8 minutes will determine whether this becomes wisdom you can actually use or just interesting concepts you remember. So let me give you the 5-part framework Jung developed for protecting your energy without becoming bitter, isolated, or defended. This externalizes the emotional debris instead of letting it loop internally. Step 4. Explicit release. Say out loud, "I release what is not mine to carry." Then visualize it leaving your body. Sounds woo, works incredibly well. Orloff has used this with thousands of empaths clinically. 83% report immediate relief. Step 5. Reestablish your boundary. Before you interact with the person who drained you again, you visualize your energetic boundary. Remember, this isn't about them. This is about you maintaining differentiation between your energy and theirs. This 5-step protocol can pull you out of even severe empathic overwhelm within a few hours. Now, before we close, I want to address one final question. After recognizing these 5 types, after setting boundaries, after protecting your energy, then what? What does thriving look like for an awakened empath? Jung's answer, confirmed by 30 years of Aron's research and validated by neuroscience, is beautiful and challenging. The individuated empath becomes a conscious mirror. They reflect truth without absorbing distortion. They feel deeply without being consumed. They love widely without depleting themselves. They've learned the secret. Your empathy is meant to flow through you, not pool within you. That's the goal, not to stop being empathic, but to let your empathy be a river, not a reservoir. Feel it, honor it, let it move through you. Don't store it. When you master this, something extraordinary happens. The right people start appearing in your life, not because you've changed your location or social circle, because you've changed your energetic signature. You're no longer broadcasting, "I will carry your pain." You're broadcasting, "I will witness your humanity." And the people who resonate with witnessing rather than carrying, those are your people. Those are the relationships that give as much as they take. Those are the connections that feed your soul instead of draining it. This is possible for you. You can be deeply empathic and deeply protected, wildly open and wisely boundaried, connected to many and depleted by none. It requires practice. It requires disappointing some people. It requires choosing yourself when every instinct says to choose others. But on the other side of that practice is freedom, the freedom to be fully yourself without apology or exhaustion. This is what separates awakened empaths who thrive from awakened empaths who suffer. Not the ability to see clearly, the ability to act on what you see with wisdom and compassion. Framework, Part 1. Discernment is not judgment. When you identify someone as an emotional vampire or a well-intentioned anchor, you're not judging them as bad people. You're discerning their capacity and adjusting your expectations accordingly. This distinction is everything. Judgment closes your heart. Discernment protects your energy while keeping your heart open. Jung said, "To see clearly is an act of compassion, both toward others and yourself. You see their limitation with love, and you honor it by not asking them to be more than they are." Framework, Part 2. You can love people without giving them access to all of you. This is the sovereignty paradigm. Love is not measured by how much you sacrifice your well-being for someone else's comfort. Love is measured by how authentically you can show up while maintaining your integrity. Some people get the surface you, some people get more depth. Few people get everything, and that's not withholding. That's wisdom. Framework Part 3. Protecting your energy requires disappointing some people. Empaths are socialized to believe that disappointing others is a moral failure. It's not. It's a natural consequence of having boundaries. When you stop overgiving, energy drainers will be disappointed. They'll express concern. They'll try to pull you back. Let them be disappointed. Their disappointment is not your emergency. Framework. Part 4. You don't need everyone to understand your journey. This is massive. Empaths waste enormous energy trying to make unconscious people understand conscious choices. Stop. You're never going to successfully explain awakening to someone who's asleep. Just live your truth and let your life be the explanation. Framework Part 5. Maintenance of your energy is sacred responsibility. As an empath, you're more sensitive to energy than most people. That's not weakness. That's your operating system. And just like you wouldn't expect a high-performance car to run on low-grade fuel, you can't expect yourself to thrive while surrounded by people who drain you. Protecting your energy is not selfish. It's basic maintenance. Jung wrote, "The empath who does not protect their energy becomes bitter and shuts down. The empath who protects their energy becomes wise and opens up to those who deserve access. Protection enables connection. It doesn't prevent it." Now let me give you the daily practice for maintaining this framework. Every evening, do a 60-second energy audit. Ask yourself 3 questions. Question 1. Who did I interact with today? List them mentally. Question 2. How did I feel during and after each interaction? Notice the pattern: energized, neutral, or drained. Question 3. Do I need to adjust access for anyone? If someone is consistently draining and you're consistently overgiving, what boundary needs to shift? This simple practice builds what Jung called empathic sovereignty. You become conscious of your energy patterns instead of being swept along by them, and consciousness creates choice. Let me also give you the emergency protocol for when you're already drained. This happens, you'll find yourself depleted despite your best boundaries. Here's the Jung-Orloff recovery method. Step 1. Solitude. Immediately. Not optional. Get alone. Cancel plans if you need to. Your system needs silence to recalibrate. Step 2. Physical grounding. Walk barefoot. Take a shower. Drink water. Touch earth. Your empathic overwhelm lives in your energetic body. Physical sensations bring you back to your actual body. Step 3. Write the drain out. Journal for 10 minutes about what happened, what you felt, what you're carrying that isn't yours. So here's what you now know. The 5 types. Emotional vampires who need constant validation. Subtle invalidators who diminish your depth. Outgrowers who can't follow where you've gone. False mirrors who reflect without substance. Well-intentioned anchors who love who you were more than who you're becoming. You know how to identify them. You know why they drain you specifically as an empath, and you know how to protect yourself without becoming bitter or closed off. This knowledge is powerful, but it's powerful only if you use it. So here's your homework. Do the 60-second energy audit tonight. Write down who drains you. Then tell me in the comments. Which type did you recognize first? Was it the emotional vampire demanding constant attention? The subtle invalidator making you doubt your perceptions? Share your insight. Let's build this awakened empath community together. Over the next week, make one conscious choice based on what you now see clearly. Set one boundary. Reduce contact with one person. Increase investment in one relationship that feels reciprocal. Don't overhaul your entire life. Just make one adjustment that honors your energy as sacred. That's how sovereignty builds. Not through dramatic action, through small consistent choices that honor your energy as sacred. Download the complete 5-type identification toolkit below. It includes the warning signs checklist, the daily energy audit template, and the emergency recovery protocol. Everything you need to implement this framework immediately. If this resonated with you, you're not alone. There are millions of awakened empaths navigating this exact journey. You're part of a growing community of people who refuse to numb themselves to fit in and refuse to exhaust themselves trying to save everyone. You're also part of the 15 to 20% of humans who process reality more deeply than the majority. Dr. Aron's 3 decades of research, Jung's century of clinical observations, and modern neuroscience all confirm the same truth. You're not broken, you're not too sensitive, you're neurologically different. And that difference is a gift when properly understood and protected. Welcome to the other side of awakening. It's challenging, and it's worth it. Take care of your energy. It's the most valuable thing you have. 30 years of research confirms what Jung observed in 1920. The empaths who protect their energy while staying open become the healers, leaders, and visionaries our world needs. You're not just preserving yourself, you're preserving your gift for those who deserve access to it.